when did you come to the Alexander technique and where did you train?
So, as a matter of fact, I had a back accident, and after a while of suffering, and things helped, but there was something still wrong. I went to visit my family in Israel, and in Israel everybody knows everything. And I came back with a telephone number and address also of Patrick MacDonald. And I called and I went to have a lesson, and I was overwhelmed. And I said to my husband, this is what I wanted all my life, only I didn't know it existed. I was so over the moon. And I had lessons for quite a while. And in these 6 weeks that I went and had lessons with him twice a week, 6, 7 weeks, something like that, I didn't think at all about training at the time. I was only concerned about my back accident.
And what year was that?
1976. It must be 1976. Maybe 75, but I think 76. Sort of September 76. And he was extremely helpful. He was extremely kind to me. He did with me so many things that people afterwards told me he never did any of that with us. Like he taught me to squat against the door. He taught me all sorts of activities that people say that, he never did that with me. And I continued to have lessons with him until actually December of this year. So I came in the beginning twice a week, and then once a week I started to visit the class. And then various things have happened, and I continued to have lessons with John Skinner. And I had lessons with John Skinner, and then I started to think about training. And eventually Misha Magidov opened his school in London, and it was John Skinner who said to me, it will suit you, actually. I feel that this will be the right place for you. And I went to Misha, and that was that. The following month, I started my training, and this was in April 81. Wow. So I finished in March 84. Lovely. And that was the North London School, I think it was called.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And so, had you already been interested in movement, or did you come to the movement before the Alexander training?
No, I came to movement long before I came to Alexander training. I was interested in movement actually all my life, from a very young age. In Israel, at the time when I grew up, a lot of Feldenkrais work was about and around. As a 13 or 14 years old girl, it was immediately after the war, the 48 war. Right. I found a teacher not far from me whose name was Lotte Christeller, who had an enormous influence on the movement and movement teaching at the time in Israel in these years. She was a very influential woman, and she also worked with Feldenkrais.
So you were having regular
I was having regular lessons with her during my youth, until I went to the army. And then after I finished my service in the army, I became a student in Jerusalem, and in no time I was looking for something like that. And I found another person who was doing an amazing movement work. And nobody knows about her outside Israel. About Lotte Christeller, maybe yes, because she worked together with Judith Binetter, who became quite actually, she worked here in England as well. Her name was Chaya Strauss. She deserves a tribute from me because she had, and also a lot of Feldenkrais work was around me. And I had, even through the university, we had some sort of, you could choose some kind of physical activity, and I chose a class where they taught, it was some kind, looking back at it, I didn't know even at the time that it was Feldenkrais. But looking back at it, it was Feldenkrais work.
And it was sort of integrated into the movement classes?
Yes, oh yes, that we did. That we did. And I didn't know about it at the time. It's only afterwards that I found out, actually, I was doing Feldenkrais work. Isn't it one? That was interesting. And when we came to England, I continued to look for an outlet for this interest of mine, which was a hobby in a way, recreational rather.
Yeah.
And I found Meadow rhythmic movement. Also by a total coincidence, I found it.
And who was the founder of that work?
Meadow was, his name was Heinrich Meadow, and he was the founder in Germany in the 20s and 30s. His whole ideas about movement are very similar, you can say, to the ideas of Laban and Dalcroze and Rudolf Steiner.
Right.
And he develops his own method, which is called Meadow rhythmic movement.
Right.
It is a very, very nice form of movement. I had a very good teacher in London who trained with him in Germany. At the moment they are, he had a school before the war in Berlin, but after the war he settled in Coburg, you know, not far from the border with what was East Berlin at the time.
Right.
East Germany, sorry,
Yeah.
East Germany. And you have to look at this movement. I mentioned these 4 names, there were many others. They were looking for a form of movement that they thought was natural,
Yes.
and away from the Swedish type exercises that were common then as part of physical education.
Yeah. Lots of people will have heard of eurythmy, won't they? That
Exactly.
Steiner
It's
movement.
yeah, and yeah, there were other people who had very similar ideas, but each one of them developed their own way of movement and of teaching it, actually.
So you were practicing this meadow movement, and
Yes.
then you came to your Alexander.
That's
work.
right.
And then
And I was already by that time a teacher of Meadow rhythmic movement,
that's
because I started, after I came across it, after a while, my teacher opened a small training course and she invited me to join the course.
wonderful.
And I joined it and I trained with her. And at that time, through this teacher, I was introduced to work with pregnant women. Because one day she gave me a book to read, and it was by Erna Wright. My teacher, by the way, her name was Beryl Smith, and she died since, and she also deserves a bit of a tribute because she had also a great influence on my way of learning and continuing and developing. And she brought me this book by Erna Wright, something about childbirth. I don't remember the title at the moment. It's a famous book, but probably out of print. And I was beyond bearing, at the age of bearing children. I had 2 young children, but I was a little bit intrigued, so my teacher gave me a book. I read it. And then I came back, and I wanted to give her back the book. And she asked me, what did you think about it? I said, well, it was very interesting, and I think, you know, we've got a lot to offer here. And she said, yes, and you're going to do it. And I said, how? She said, have you noticed at the back of the book there is an address for the National Childbirth Trust? You call them and you talk to them. So I did. Teacher said. So I did. I was intrigued, really. And eventually I trained as an NCT teacher, National Childbirth Trust, which was childbirth education.
Yeah.
And then I started my training in the Alexander technique.
And so you began to integrate.
And then I just really put 2 and 2 together. I really did not intend it to be like that. It just happened. Because once I was already a childbirth educator and I came across the technique, I just realized that if the primary control is not maintained, then we can do it, of course we can, but it's not the same.
No.
And that's how I started to develop the whole of my movement, all my thoughts about movement. I want to tell you that it all really started with childbirth.
Yeah.
I did not introduce it to the Alexander technique. Until later. I first of all integrated it to childbirth because when you are in pain, you cannot sit quietly and direct.
No.
Or you can, but for this you need to be, many, many years into the technique. Of course, you can inhibit and direct. But the majority of people are not there. And it is easier for them to maintain the primary control in the movement. So I started to think about movements that will help during the pain of contractions, in which we can maintain the primary control and continue to think about length, width, and depth. And really everything came together from that. And then suddenly I found myself that I'm developing some kind of movement that is lovely. And that with all this background that I had, so these are the things that when you ask me before when you mentioned to me, what did you use? You haven't yet asked me this question, sorry. But you mentioned it in passing that, what do I use? It really is, I did not invent anything. I just put 2 and 2 together and came to what I'm doing at the moment.
So it's like a sort of integration of all your disciplines and interests that have sort of become the way you teach.
Yeah.
So can I ask you, so after you trained and then you were teaching childbirth and you were teaching Alexander and all these things, and then eventually you came to open a training school.
Yes.
And you began to integrate movement within the day of the training.
That's right.
And how do you find that enhances the Alexander training?
Yeah. I think that while you move in a rhythmic way, because if you've noticed, there is a rhythm in all the movements that you've already got on the video.
Yes.
It enhances the flow of movement. We go a little bit beyond everyday movement.
Yes.
In Alexander days, people moved much more, and the range of movement was wider. They walked more. They still had to do lots of things and activities that used a wider range of movement than we are doing now.
And as you said at the tea break, they would have had meals and
Well,
cooked together even.
apparently, we learned that.
Yeah.
We are talking now about teaching the Alexander technique, and in all our belief, it is for everyday activities.
Yeah.
Our everyday activities became more and more limited. So I think that for my student, I would have expected them to have a better range of movement.
Yeah.
And in what I'm thinking about in the movement that I am teaching is to maintain the primary control, the length, whatever helps the back to lengthen, and at the same time on a wider range of everyday activity. I'll give you the simplest example of all. Even office workers before the 50s, mind you, I see a great change from the 50s in the design of furniture, in the fact that we drive more and more cars and we sit at the wheel for longer periods of time.
Yeah.
So I think that we lose a range of movement, and I meet young people who haven't got already the full range of the movement of the arm, and I just think this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
So you're finding that bringing this, as you say, slightly extra than everyday movement, this sort of enhancing everyday movement, this movement into the training course, is informing people's Alexander work.
Exactly. And it also creates a better flow, if you like, in them. Now, I don't teach my private pupil who come to me necessarily any movement unless they ask for it, or unless it's for music students who really need to go beyond, because otherwise repetitive strain injury will set in.
Yes.
So with all the music students that I have, I teach them movement also to release during rehearsals. And I just got a very nice feedback from Poppy, who said that during rehearsals now she found out that before I taught her these movements, she was just sitting there thinking about directions and actually sitting and being a little bit tired and becoming stiffer with it. And now, instead of, if she's got only 2, 3, 4 minutes in which she can release, she just go into one of these movements, and it is very, very helpful.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it's nice feedback.
And that kind of brings me on to the another question, which is where do you see the possibilities of the integration of the movement and Alexander going in the future? Do you feel you'll keep it as part of the training school and your students will have that as part of their repertoire in their teaching?
If they wish, what I'm looking for is that they are able to create and to improvise very simple movements with the ideas that they learn here, and that it will help to improve the use of the self in all their activities. So I really expect that it will enhance their teaching, their own ability to teach, and their own flow and directions, which I hope. You know, since I came to the Alexander technique and with this background in movement, I was naturally interested in dart procedure. And I started to study them. We had sessions in the school with Jean Clark. And I had several workshops with the Murrays. And I started to think more about the spirals in movement. And then I started to observe again toddlers and young children. And I noticed that until the age of about 2, I mean, we all know it, only it was relearning it, re-observing. I knew it, and then it went out like many other things. Re-observing and watching them, I realized that, of course, what I said before, we all know, that children cannot learn any motor development unless they have the primary control, because they cannot move before the head is balanced on the top of the spine. They cannot continue to develop movement. They have the primary control unconsciously. It is not that they are aware of it.
No.
They just have it.
Yes.
It's in us.
Yes.
At the same time, I noticed that they move a lot with the spirals. They are not, for instance, when they learn to sit up, they never come up like sitting up. They always roll direct with the head and come up into sitting. And then from there, they take themselves into the crawl. So all the time, it's the primary control with the spirals working together. And so this is something that I've added a little bit more into the movement that I am teaching. And we also do some floor work in this school, which I don't know, occasionally, not every day. We start with a movement for about 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, but not much more. We walk a little bit, instead of meditating, we walk a little bit, and then we start the day. We stop, find a moment of peace, and start the day. But about once a week or once a fortnight, we do a little bit of floor work, in which I also incorporate these ideas of primary control, lengthening, and spiral movement.
It's very beautiful to see that even when you're taking people in and out of chairs or just describing monkey, that you have a spiral within that movement often, don't you?
Well, I'm now thinking more about it.
Yes, very interesting. Do you feel we've covered everything that you wanted to say? Is there anything else you...
One more thing that I would like to add.
Yes.
Learning again from children.
Yes.
I want to say two things about it.
Yes.
I believe that we all store in us the memories of moving well with the primary control, although it was on an unconscious level.
Yes.
We store it in us. And therefore, it is sometimes very nice in the teaching, and with absolutely everybody, to create, in a little bit of an artificial way, a childlike way of learning, which is with the curiosity and the unknown.
Lovely.
And I think that it is very... I often explain it to people. I say, we have to create occasionally artificial situation for learning.
Yes. And in a way, the inhibition creates that space for the learning, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And rather than just the information.
Of course.
The movement is enhancing that space, that to sort of enhance, I suppose, in a way that the movement helps us to find actually inhibition.
I think it helps us. Inhibition is a very difficult concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's the technique is all about inhibition.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about inhibition. In other words, it's inhibiting the reaction to any stimulation.
Yeah.
But we don't always have to say it all the time. It is just there for you to rediscover.
Yeah. Well, I've been so lucky because you've helped me not just with Alexander and with movement, but also with childbirth.
Oh, thank you.
So I've been so fortunate.
Thank you. It's very sweet of you to say it. Lovely. Thank you.
And the rhythm is so important because in a funny sort of way, Alexander can be very rhythmic, including the breath and.
Of course, I think a good Alexander lesson has rhythm.
Yes, I agree.
It has rhythm. It has a warm up. It comes into a sort of, if you like, crescendo or something like that, and it dies away again, and it gathers force again. A good Alexander lesson has rhythm, and I really think so. Yeah.
I think that's a very beautiful place to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.